you very much, Emmanuel, and welcome everybody. So I'm going to do a quick demo here. So what I'm going to show is the document security module in action in WebSphere Commerce. So WebSphere Commerce Server is a very powerful e-commerce platform, and what we're looking at this point is a page from that, and it's kind of based on the sample store they gave us. And so we see here is a department, digital content, several of these documents, and we have a brand here, Soothsayers and Fortune Tellers Institute, and so they have the ability actually to predict the future and put these in these documents. So they're pretty important documents, and we're going to pick this one here, Farmer's Future Almanac 2017, and go ahead and put that into the cart. And so fairly, typical e-commerce shopping flow. And that's good enough. We'll just go to checkout from here. And this is the final, actually it's not, my apologies, we've got to set up a payment method here. Choose Visa card. We have a dummy card number. And proceed to the order summary. So this next page is the final page that, you see in any typical e-commerce scenario, the time to really make the purchase. And at this point, the document security module hasn't really been a factor. It's just been the e-commerce flow out of WebSphere itself. So, but when I press this order button, what's going to happen is that the system is going to make a web services SOA style call to FileOpen's permission server, and what it's going to do is take the contents of the shopping cart as well as the user information. This individual has logged in. You can see we have Joe Smith, test user here. And so it's going to wrap this up into a single web services call, send it to the FileOpen server. The FileOpen server is going to give access to the documents and respond with an access code that's going to enable the end user to immediately download the document and decrypt it and view it on their systems. So it can also certainly send an email to the customer, and so with that, let me just go ahead and do it. So it's going to go ahead and, at this point, making the call to the back end. And take just a second here. And then, okay, so here we have your basic order confirmation page. And so what's interesting here is we have, some links as well as some credentials here. And certainly several different file types can be handled and encrypted. I think we'll hear a little bit more about that later. But one of the very nice things about FileOpen's technology is they have zero install clients for browsers. So there's no plugin in this browser at this point. It's a standard browser. But when I open this file, OPN, it's going to automatically bring up the FileOpen zero install client. So the user has to do nothing to experience what you're seeing now. Now, here we are challenged for the credentials to actually see the document. So we'll come back to this page and simply paste these in. Excuse me. And the access code here. And then here we have the decrypted document. Now, the important thing to keep in mind here is that this user's machine has now been authenticated to this document. And so any subsequent attempts to open this document won't be challenged. They'll be able to just simply see it whenever they choose to click on this link. They can save the link. And the link is actually sent to them as well, in this case, in an email. Now, the emails take a while to come out, so this is not the email from the order that I just did, but it's one from yesterday, but I'd like to just show you what it looks like. You see we have the same information here, the ability to download things, as well as the credentials. And so one final thing on the WebSphere to offer is that this we're also working on HTML5 file format, and it's going to work in a very similar manner. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about the details later, but it's going to be able to open these files as well in much the same way as the OPN. It's going to make things even more smooth. So, so that's pretty much what we have going from WebSphere. Now, there's one more minor quick thing I'd like to show you, and that is that we've also been working on the same technology with other e-commerce systems, and most notably Magento at this point. And so this is all in development, and what we're looking at is pretty much a mock-up of how this will work, but you can see it's fairly similar. Now what this is a My Account page for this user who happens to be logged in, test user. There's many different things they could do, but if they go to a My Downloadable Products, they'll see something like this, and it's very similar to what we saw just now with the WebSphere. You have the different file options. I don't have the HTML one in here yet, but again, you see the credentials here, and so we're able to do this with a variety of e-commerce platforms, and that's what we're looking at doing. And so I think with that, I'm going to pass things on to our CEO, Stanford Bingham. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dave. Can I be heard?
Yes.
I'm hoping that I can be heard good. Okay, so let me just show my screen. Thanks a lot, Dave. We're very excited about this e-commerce integration. It's something that has been done before, and there are a number of sites on the web that have been using FileOpen for the e-commerce of documents for several years, or 10 years probably. The largest of them probably the one that Elizabeth mentioned, webstore.ansi.org, where you can go to buy a digital copy of any ANSI standard and get that delivered to you as a PDF from with the FileOpen encryption on it. So I'd like to speak a little bit about what was going on behind Dave's demo. That is to say, the server piece that he invoked from the e-commerce front end that he developed. And the key thing there is that we have a number of interfaces from what is essentially a big database system that we call our permission server. And that permission server has three primary interfaces. One is the one that you just saw, or at least in the e-commerce framework, it has three. One is the one that you just saw, which is to say that it can be called programmatically from another process running somewhere else on the web. And in fact, what you saw Dave do there a moment ago was run software in Java under IBM WebSphere e-commerce that called out over a structured web service call to an interface exposed by a permission server operated in our hosted environment, our rights manager product. And in essence, what Dave did was add a user to a database. And we can look at that database, I have this code up here on the screen so that you can get a sense of what we mean by an XML interface. This is the so-called WSDL to that interface, and of course nobody other than an engineer would know what to do with this. The point being that it is a standard XML order service interface, and any shopping cart, Magento, IBM, etc., can call it. But the thing to bear in mind is that that's only one of the interfaces to the permission server. And there are two others that I hope you'll bear in mind. And one of them is an administrative interface, which I've brought up here. And that is the publisher's dashboard for managing users, groups, documents, multis, permissions. And I'll go through a little bit of that. And there's also a set of tools for encryption of documents that we've talked about in previous webinars, and we'll go over again if we have time today. But the key point here is that we have in this permission server database a set of permission rules, and one of them is the farm group. And the farm group contains, in this case, I think just one document, but could in principle contain many documents. And I'd like to, sorry, one moment here. I have to back in here. It's important to bear in mind that this e-commerce integration need not be single document sale. It is possible to sell through the e-commerce application or interface a collection of documents, a subscription to documents, some of which may not exist yet. There is no requirement that a single user purchase a single document at one time. In this case, we have a document that is, or a group rather, that contains the document that Dave just opened, which I believe is this one. And in fact, we can verify that that's the one that he opened by going to the record for that document and checking the usage of that document. So the larger point here is that it's not the document, so it must have been a different one. We'll find it. But the important point is that users can be added to the database in multiple ways. One of them is a web service call to the whistle that I pointed out. Users can be imported into the database and mass mailed with their credentials from the database. Users can be added individually to the database using the interface that you see here. And if we look at the Joe at email test user, which is the one that Dave just used, we do see here that, in fact, that user opened a document on today's date at today's time in MT, and the document was the one that Dave opened. So that user got online access to the document. And there are some business models in which that's sufficient, that what you're selling is a subscription to documents that are being posted to a website, for example, and users should have access to that website or not, depending on whether they've purchased that access. But there are other business models, as Elizabeth alluded to, that involve more delivery of discrete objects, sometimes PDF, sometimes now we follow files, and in principle also HTML. I'll come back to HTML in a moment. But let me show you first something about our client viewer technology. And for this I'm going to use a different document because the one that Dave was using only has 2 pages and isn't all that interesting. What I'll show you instead now is a PDF of the same document, which is in this case the specification document for the Flash file format, SWF. And I have this document open in 3 forms. And the point that I want to make about these are that at first they look the same, and we've done a lot of work to try to make sure that we can render in SWF, which is to say Flash, and also in HTML. And I can bring the HTML version out here as well, that we can render in Flash and HTML a PDF with absolute clarity, with the objects all looking the same, the fonts all looking the same, the page breaks in the same places, the color is right, and so forth. We believe that that's a true statement, that this document as a PDF here in Adobe Reader. This document as OPN rendered here in the desktop OPN viewer, and this document as a OPN file rendered on the iPad will all look identical. So we'll go to page 20 of each of them. And also, see if I can find the, if we go to page 20, I don't think I actually have a page, well, let's see, we'll go to page 20 this way in the HTML. Oops, not page 120. Anyway, they should all look the same. One thing that you'll notice about them is that there's a watermark across the top, and that watermark, and there's another in the diagonal direction and a third along the bottom. And these watermarks are all imposed at the client end. That is to say, when the document is opened, these watermarks are imposed via a client-server protocol interaction between the viewer code running in the user's browser or on the user's desktop, in Adobe Reader, in the FileOpen Viewer app, on the iPad, and I'll ask you, by the way, to believe me when I tell you that we can also render this same document identically in Android as well with the FileOpen Viewer. And these watermarks are part of the encryption package, if you like. They're part of the client-server interaction, and they can be modified along with other things about the document. So first, one thing you may notice here is that I do have the ability to print this document. The print menu is active here. It's lit up here, and well, actually there is no printing on iOS at the moment, so it's not there. But let's suppose that we chose not to grant that permission, and then we could modify that after the fact now and without having to re-encrypt the document, because permissions, watermarks, are handled through a protocol layer, so two users opening the same document can get different permissions. One be allowed to print, the other not. One be allowed to see certain pages, the other not see those pages. There's quite a lot of granularity around the permissions. But the same bytes of the same file opened by two different users or by the same user at different times can get different permissions, one of which would be printing. We can also grant offline permission, and we can grant offline permission in several ways. There's a preemptive offline permission, and in a single copy kind of sale world, the sort that Dave was showing, that might be the appropriate solution. A user buys the document on a particular device. That user might not expect that there would be additional protocol interactions with any server. The user has bought the document and should be able to open it whether the device is connected to the internet or not. And there shouldn't be any further tracking of that user's behavior with that document. One scenario. Another scenario is that a user is buying access to some information stream from the publisher, and one of the conditions, or perhaps one of the features of that information stream, is that the publisher can pass messages about documents. If a document has been revoked, has been superseded, that publisher should be able to notify the user that there is a newer document. In principle, that publisher should be allowed to revoke the user's access to all documents or only some documents, and should be able to do that whether the user, even if the user is some of the time offline. So we also have a mode that we call inverted mode, where the determination of whether the permission should be used from the local store on the user's machine or from the server is based on whether the machine is connected or not. We, I think, have another webinar that's available on demand that goes into more detail about the things that can be done at the level of permissioning. So I won't belabor it too much here, but I would like to demonstrate that these watermarks are, in fact, dynamic by changing one of them. So you see that we have three here. There's a default header, a default footer, and a default diagonal up. and I can go into the text of any of these, and I can change that text to contain some different combination of parameters and strings. In this case, what we have are calls essentially into the database that say, for each footer watermark, go get the first name, last name, company, and UUID of the user that is opening the document, so that, again, two users opening the same document will see each their own name on there and not some generic text. But it's also possible to put generic text into these, and so we'll say do not copy is the word of the day here. We'll put a little bracket there, and we'll save this watermark policy back into the permission server, and then we'll reload the document in each of these forms. And here it is, first as a PDF, and we see now the word do not copy at the bottom. We'll relaunch the FileOpen viewer, and let me say a few words about this FileOpen viewer. This is the desktop version of the FileOpen viewer. There is also, as Dave showed you, an online version. Let me whip that one up. But in the scenario that I've been describing, where offline permission is part of the requirement set, using the browser for offline activity is a confusing endeavor for most people, myself included. So we've decided that rather than trying to teach people to save files to their disk from their browser and then retrieve those files from their disk with their browser, we will provide a lightweight client that looks and acts like Adobe Reader, but which doesn't have all of the overhead associated with Adobe Reader. And this thing that you see me working now is that tool. It can be installed by any user without a requirement that that user have administrative permissions. It doesn't do everything that we can do when we are installed via the, as a binary plugin to Adobe Reader. It lacks some of that functionality, but it does the main thing, which is that it will open a document with the appropriate watermarks, and will do that on the user's desktop, whether that user is online or offline. And let me also do the same thing here now with the iPad. Actually, I can do it this way. If I reload the document like this, we'll see that reload on the iPad as well. And so we should see here in just a moment. Now notice, by the way, that documents can be split into parts, OPN documents. They don't have to be, but if they're large documents, they will load more quickly, particularly on handheld devices if they are split into parts. So that what you're seeing there along the bottom are the different parts being loaded in. If offline permission is granted to the end user device, then those parts are saved to the local device, and when the user tries to open the documents offline, those parts are all retrieved. All of that is transparent to the user. Well, let me show one other thing here, and first I guess we can go back into the permission server via the administrative interface. And by the way, let me just, since I think I left this hanging previously, I said there were three interfaces primarily, and one of them is that programmatic eCommerce interface. And there are others like that do the encryption of documents from the local disk of the licensee. And that's an important point that we do try to bring out, and when possible, that encryption of the documents is not done on our server, it's done on your desktop. So your unencrypted documents never have to leave your premises, and there are interfaces to the permission server for that as well for the encryption of documents. There's an administrative interface, and the third is the client interface, which, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, involves now a fairly wide variety of clients, and you can see a number of them on my screen here. If I minimize this, that we have our own plugins for Adobe Reader and Adobe Acrobat going back to, well, in principle, Acrobat 4. Our first plugin was in Acrobat 2.1, long ago. But we also now have integrations going on through a library that we make available to partners for a number of other PDF viewers, including Nuance PDF Converter Pro and Nuance PDF Reader, the Foxit Phantom, which is their Acrobat equivalent, and the Foxit Reader, Nitro, which actually I don't think is in the release product yet, but will be shortly, and Bluebeam, another PDF reader. And we have our own integration using that same library with the Microsoft Office formats, both the older binary and the newer XML file formats in Microsoft Office for Windows versions 2007, 10, and 13, the latter two, 32 and 64-bit. And now we also have the FileOpen Viewer, which is this lightweight installed client for end users who want offline permission to documents. So just as a final thing, since we want to leave some time for questions here, I will just, as an experiment, find the documents that I just opened. And there were actually two of them. One of them was the PDF and the other the OPN. And I will, to use Elizabeth's word, unshare those documents. I'll revoke those documents and check that we're not able to open them. I'm not able to open them any further. So if we look here, we see that I opened a document called SWF file format, and with the extension open, and I opened that same document again, but there was also a PDF. So if I look for that document to the database, actually I can do that more simply. I'll just search for SWF. And SWF, I find the two documents. So first, let's revoke the OPN version, and we can do that in a number of ways. We can expire documents, we can embargo documents, we can expire users' access to documents so that a particular user can see the document for 6 months, and at the end of 6 months that user can no longer see the document, but all other users can until their expiration period arrives. And there are a number of permutations around expiration, but there's also this kind of kill switch, if you like, on the document. I'm just going to revoke this document globally. And while I'm at it, I'll revoke the PDF as well. And so now these are all gone. And if I close this and try to open it again, I'm told by the permission server that that document is no longer available. If I try to open it here in the desktop viewer, and it was the one here in my Dropbox, and it was called SWF. These are the split files. All right, here we go. I'll try to open that. And over here on the iPad, and again, I'll ask you to suspend disbelief, and believe me when I say that the same is true on Android, the same behavior. So I'm trying to open this document again now on iOS, and I should get the same error. So Our point then is that we have a consistent user interface across a variety of different environments. There will be a Macintosh version of the FileOpen viewer, lightweight offline viewer, and there will be a Linux version of that if we can accomplish that. Certainly the FileOpen viewer in the browser works on Linux. If you have the Chrome browser on Linux, then these Flash documents will also render there and be revocable there as well. So having said all that, and hopefully that was enough, I'll stop here and pass it back to Emmanuel, and we'll try to answer any questions that may have come in. Thank you all for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Sanford and Dave, for your demos. So we have a few minutes left for Q&A, and I really wish we had more time because we've been getting some really great questions. But without further ado, we have a question from Pamela, and she asks, if someone shares the login credentials with someone else, can they access the document?
Sure. Well, the answer to that depends on what Dave mentioned, and Elizabeth as well, what that user's machine count is. And this is an important point that we probably didn't bring out enough in the conversation, which is that we have the ability to identify users at the device level. And the device level, the meaning of that varies a little bit with devices or at least with our access to the hardware of those devices. And we operate in basically two different spheres, perhaps three. One of them is when we've installed our client onto your operating system. And we have, by that I mean mostly our PDF plugin, but also the ones that I mentioned, the Nuance and Foxit and so forth, and Microsoft Office. There, that's kind of the old way of doing things. We're a program that's installed. We're running with user privileges. Even if we're running in a reduced rights mode like the Adobe Reader Protected mode, which we do support and allow to be on at all times, we have a process that's running outside of Adobe Reader that has user privileges, and so we have really full visibility over what's going on at the machine, and we can identify uniquely the actual piece of hardware that we're on. In some of the other environments, the browser in particular, and especially with HTML5, we're in a sandbox, and we're not allowed to break through that sandbox to go looking at the actual hardware, but we are able to preserve data and persist data, so we're able to identify the machine uniquely. And actually, we'll be having another webinar at some point about the HTML5 and some of the work that we've been doing around fingerprinting of browsers. So we do know how to uniquely identify a browser itself. So anyway, the answer to the question is if the user's machine limit is 1 and the user has registered a machine, then sharing that user's credentials will not work. The user would then be trying, the second user, the past 2 user would be trying to register a different machine, and because the user's limit is 1, then that machine would not be registered. If the user's limit is 2 and the user shares credentials, then the recipient of those credentials would be able to register a machine, and the original user would then no longer be able to register other machines. So it comes down to a machine limit, and you get to decide how those machines are allocated, how many devices a particular user should have. I'll stop there.
Okay. We have a question from Adelaine. She asks, can I use FileOpen for e-commerce with Shopify?
That's a good question. I know we have it on our list to answer that, and my suspicion is yes. Normally, e-commerce systems are designed to enable calls to external modules of the sort that we're describing here. And so I guess we'll have to get back to Adelaine by email on that once we've done a little bit more research. So unless, Dave, you have a actual answer for that. I think we'll just have to say that we don't know yet, but it should be possible.
I agree. I mean, I've looked at it a little bit, and I definitely agree with what you're saying, and I think it's something we could definitely do in the future if need be.
Okay. We have a question from Saviz asking, what other alternatives are there to the FileOpen hosted permission server?
Okay. Well, there are three ways that we expose the ability to do e-commerce and all the rest of what we've been showing. The first is that we have a software development environment, if you like, a toolkit that we license that exposes the low-level interfaces to encrypt and convert documents and the client-server protocol, and enables anyone who wants to build a permission server in their own code or integrate that permission server into some existing web portal module. And that supports e-commerce not through the WSDL, because that WSDL or web service that we were demonstrating is part of what I'm about to describe, not part of the toolkit, but it is certainly possible to create e-commerce, and there are a number of e-commerce implementations out there that are built from, if you like, the ground up. We also built server apparatus around from that same toolkit, and we try to take it as a point of pride that our implementation doesn't have any secret APIs or anything. We built it from that same toolkit, and we make that available in two forms. It's the same code. The only difference in the product names is really where that code is executing. And we call one of those Rights Manager, and that's the one that we host on our servers, and the one that I'm demonstrating today. It shows that is what we license out is a cloud interface, the web UI that we saw, to a hosted database running on the server that we manage. Encryption, again, as I mentioned, is done locally on your device, but the document metadata is registered with the permission server, and that permission server is hosted by us. So all you need to use that is a Windows PC that you can do the encryption on and some device that has a web browser. Then that same permission server code can be installed on the licensees in the licensee's environment, and we call that one Rights Server. The code itself is the same. The difference is simply that in one case it's managed by you, and in the other case it's managed by us.
Okay, thank you, Sanford. It looks like we're all out of time, fortunately. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. If you have any further questions, please contact us at contact@fileopen.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and have a great day.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Thank you all.